I thought my dad just didn't love me, but turns out he wasn't my real father. I didn't cry at my father's funeral. I didn't feel much of anything, really. Not because I wasn't sad, but because I had already spent years grieving a relationship that was never real. I stood near the back of the room, just far enough to avoid the pitying glances and the whispering relatives who acted like they knew the whole story. They didn't. Not even close. You see, a week before the funeral, I found out that my father left me nothing. Not a dollar. Not a sentimental watch. Not even a letter. The will was crystal clear. Everything went to my older brother, Ryan. The house. The savings. The retirement account. Even my mother's jewelry, the few pieces he still had after she passed, were handed over to him. The lawyer didn't even flinch when he read it. No room for interpretation. I was simply excluded. No explanation, no caveats. Just absence. At first, I assumed it was favoritism. It wouldn't have surprised me. Ryan was always the golden boy. The captain of the football team, the straight-A student, the guy who gave dad grandkids by 30. Meanwhile, I was the black sheep. Quiet. Different. I never wanted the same things Ryan did, and dad never understood that. I think it bothered him. No. I know it did. Still, I showed up to the funeral. Not for him, exactly. For closure, maybe. For my own peace. I needed to look at that casket and remind myself that I didn't have to chase his approval anymore. That was gone. Done. Buried. The service itself was exactly what you'd expect. Clean. Polished. Boring. Ryan gave a speech that sounded like he copied it off a website. People nodded along, cried in the right places, and pretended like he was some kind of pillar of moral authority. I kept waiting for someone, anyone, to say something real. Something messy. But no one did. Afterwards, I lingered near the back of the church hall where they served coffee and tiny sandwiches no one touched. People gave me polite nods but didn't approach. It was like I was radioactive. I guess when you're not in the will, you're not worth making small talk with. That's when I saw him. A tall man in a wrinkled brown suit. White hair, thick eyebrows, slightly hunched but still sharp. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. He was sipping coffee alone near the wall, his eyes scanning the room like he was looking for someone to talk to but hadn't found them yet. I didn't think much of it until he walked up to me. "You must be Aaron," he said, eyes narrowing with a smile. I nodded slowly. "Yeah. And you are?" "Name's Hank. I worked with your dad for nearly 20 years. Back in the union days." That clicked something. I remembered Dad mentioning Hank once or twice, mostly in stories I half listened to as a teenager. "Didn't expect you to look so much like your mother," Hank said with a low chuckle. "Your dad always said that. Especially after everything." I tilted my head. "After what?" Hank blinked, then glanced around. His voice dropped. "After what she did. I mean, your dad never really got over it. But I guess none of us would've." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean, what she did?" Hank's face went pale. His smile vanished. "Oh, shit," he muttered. "You didn't know." I stepped closer. "Didn't know what?" He looked down at his coffee, then back at me. "Sorry, kid. That's not my place." I thought you knew." My stomach dropped. The air around me seemed to shift. I had spent years wondering why my father always kept me at a distance. Suddenly, a door cracked open. And something inside me knew, I was about to learn the truth. I didn't move for a while after Hank walked away. He gave a half-hearted apology, then disappeared into the crowd like he hadn't just cracked open a vault I didn't even know existed. I stood there, frozen, clutching a paper cup I hadn't sipped from, staring through people like they weren't real. The words kept circling in my head like vultures. After what she did. I had always known something was off. Something unsaid. But I had blamed it on grief, on distance, on the kind of father who loved through silence and rules. I never imagined it had anything to do with my mother. She died when I was 7. I barely remembered her face without pictures. But I remembered how cold the house felt afterward. How quickly her things vanished. How fast Ryan adjusted while I just floated in that emptiness. Dad didn't talk about her. Not even when I asked. He used to shut down entirely or change the subject. Once, when I was maybe 10, I brought out one of her old scarves I found in a drawer. He took it from my hands and tossed it in the trash without a word. I remember how that felt. Like being erased. Now I was beginning to understand why. I found Hank again outside, leaning against his car with a cigarette already lit. He looked startled when I walked up, but I didn't let him speak first. "What did my mom do?" I asked. He took a long drag and exhaled slowly. "Aaron, look." I shouldn't have said anything. Your dad was a proud man. He didn't like people knowing his business. I stepped closer. He's dead. And apparently, I didn't even make the cut in his will. I think I deserve to know. Hank stared at the pavement for a moment, then nodded like he was making peace with something. It wasn't just the affair. It was the way it came out. Messy. Public. And your dad, he was never the same after that. I blinked. What do you mean affair? He raised an eyebrow. You really didn't know? I shook my head, heart racing. Your mom had an affair. Long one. With someone your dad knew. When he found out, he lost it. Walked off the job site, didn't speak to anyone for days. And when he came back, he wasn't the same. Meaner. Quieter. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. Who was it? Hank hesitated, then said, "No one you'd know. He died a long time ago. But your dad always thought, well, he always questioned whether you were his." The words hit harder than I expected. Like I'd been kicked in the chest. He thought I wasn't his son. He never said it out loud. Not to me, anyway. But you could see it. The way he looked at you. The way he looked at Ryan. It was different. I stepped back, mind spinning. All those years I spent chasing his approval. The distance. The absence from the will. It wasn't favoritism. It was doubt. Quiet, buried, eating away at everything. I wanted to scream. Or cry. Or hit something. But instead, I just stood there while Hank finished his cigarette in silence. When he flicked it into the gutter, he glanced at me one last time. I liked your dad. But he wasn't always fair. Especially to you. I just thought you should know. He got in his car and drove off. I stayed on the sidewalk, staring at the spot where he'd stood, my hands shaking. My father died with secrets in his mouth and resentment in his heart. And I was only just starting to dig through the pieces. I didn't go home right away. I drove around for hours with no direction, letting the streets blur past my windows while Hank's words echoed in my head. He thought I wasn't his. That line looped through me like a fault line cracking open. Every memory I had with my father began to twist in on itself. Every cold glance, every wordless dinner, every ignored birthday. I used to tell myself he just wasn't good at showing love. Now it felt like maybe he had convinced himself I didn't deserve it. I finally pulled over at a park I used to go to as a kid. Ryan and I would race bikes down the dirt path while Mom sat at a picnic bench, always yelling for us to slow down. I sat there now, in the silence, staring at that same bench. It was faded and cracked but still standing. I wondered if that was symbolic or just weather. I tried to picture my mom in the middle of an affair. It didn't feel real. She had always seemed kind, patient, soft-spoken. But then again, I was a kid. Kids see what they want. Maybe the signs were there. Maybe the whispers I heard behind closed doors weren't about money or stress. Maybe they were about betrayal. I checked my phone, scrolled through old pictures, and landed on the last photo I had of her. She was sitting on the porch, legs crossed, a small smile like she didn't know the camera was pointed at her. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. Then I remembered something. A letter. There was a moment years ago, after I turned 18, when Dad gave me a box of my mom's things. He said I should have them, that he didn't want them in the house anymore. At the time, I didn't ask questions. I was just happy to have something that felt like a connection to her. I stored it in the back of my closet and never really looked through it in detail. I drove home and pulled the box out like it was radioactive. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were a few scarves, a necklace I hadn't seen since I was a kid, and a handful of small journals. I flipped through the first two. Nothing unusual. Grocery lists, little notes about Ryan and me growing up, some old receipts stuck between the pages. Then I found it. A sealed envelope with my name on the front. The handwriting was hers. Sharp and looping. I sat down on the floor and stared at it for a long time before I opened it. Inside was a letter. Dated 2 weeks before she died. It started off gentle, almost like a lullaby. She told me how much she loved me, how proud she was of the person I was becoming. She talked about my quiet nature, how I always asked thoughtful questions, how I saw the world differently than Ryan. Then the tone shifted. She admitted she had made mistakes. That there were things she wished she could undo. And then she said it. There's a chance your father isn't your biological parent. I never told him the full truth. I thought it would destroy him. I thought we could move on. But I think he always suspected, even if he never said it out loud. My hands went numb. The rest of the letter blurred. Apologies. Regrets. Love. She hadn't meant for this to be a burden. She hoped I'd forgive her. I folded the letter back up, closed the box, and sat there in silence. My entire identity suddenly felt like a question mark. And the one person who might have answered it was buried 6 feet under. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I laid in bed with the letter beside me, the words burned into my mind like a brand. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her handwriting, those loops and curves spelling out the one thing I never expected to question. Who was I? I wanted answers, but there was no one left to ask. My mom was gone. My dad, too. I thought about calling Ryan, but I stopped myself. We weren't close, not really. Our relationship had become polite and distant over the years, like two co-workers who used to be friends. And besides, he was the one who got everything. The house, the inheritance, the role of true son. What would I even say? Hey, did you know Dad might not have been my real father? I could already hear his awkward silence on the other end of the line. By morning, I felt sick. Not physically, but in that deep, restless way that comes when your foundation shifts overnight. I needed movement, something to do. So I drove. Not aimlessly this time, but toward my father's old house. The house I grew up in. The house that now belonged to Ryan. When I pulled up, his car was in the driveway. I sat in mine for a few minutes, debating whether to get out. Then I saw him walk to the mailbox and pause when he noticed me. He walked over slowly, confusion on his face. Aaron. What's going on? I got out and walked to meet him halfway. I need to ask you something. About Dad. And Mom. Ryan stiffened slightly, like he braced for a hit. Okay. Sure. Come in. Inside, the house looked exactly the same, which somehow made it worse. Same photos on the wall. Same furniture. Same smell. Like nothing had changed, like our childhood was still trapped in the walls. We sat in the living room. Ryan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You all right? I nodded, then shook my head. No. Not really. He waited. I found a letter. From Mom. She wrote it before she died. Ryan's eyebrows rose. What kind of letter? She said, there's a chance Dad wasn't my real father. His expression didn't change at first. He just blinked. What? She had an affair. She said she never told him the full truth, but she thought he always suspected. I think that's why he treated me the way he did. Why he left everything to you. Ryan leaned back slowly. He looked like someone had kicked the air out of him. Jesus. I watched him closely. You didn't know? He shook his head. No. I mean, I always thought there was something weird. The way he treated you. It wasn't fair. I asked him once, years ago, why he was so hard on you. He just said, not everything is as it seems. That's it. I thought he meant your personality. I never imagined it was because he thought you weren't his. Do you think it's true? He hesitated. I don't know. But, it would explain a lot. We sat in silence for a while. I could feel the weight of it settling over both of us. Years of confusion, pain, misunderstanding, all boiling down to one secret neither of us had been meant to carry. Finally, Ryan spoke. I'm sorry, Aaron. For everything. If I had known, I nodded. I'm not blaming you. I just needed to know if you were part of it. He looked down. No. But I get why you'd wonder. And for the first time in years, I believed him. We didn't talk much after that. Ryan offered me coffee, but I declined. I didn't have the appetite for small talk. My hands were still trembling, not from anger anymore, but from the sheer weight of everything I had learned. The will, the letter, the doubts, all of it had cracked something open inside me. I felt hollow. Like I'd lost a father twice. Before I left, Ryan said something that stuck with me. You know, Dad kept a lockbox in the basement. I never opened it, but he was weirdly protective of it. Used to keep it under his workbench. Maybe there's something in there you should see. I stared at him. You're okay with me looking? He shrugged. I think it's yours more than it's mine. That surprised me. Coming from Ryan, it felt like an apology he didn't know how to say directly. The basement hadn't changed either. Same concrete floor, same faint smell of sawdust and damp wood. I walked to the far end where Dad's old workbench still stood, cluttered with tools and half-finished projects. Beneath it, wedged behind a stack of paint cans, was the lockbox. It was heavy, metal, and scratched up from years of being moved around. The kind of thing people use when they don't trust banks. It wasn't locked. Inside were envelopes, some labeled, some not. Faded photographs. A folded-up birth certificate, mine. I flipped through the contents with shaking hands, unsure what I was looking for. Then I saw it. A sealed manila envelope labeled simply, Aaron. My heart kicked into overdrive. I took it upstairs, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it slowly. Inside were 3 things, a letter, a photo, and a single DNA test result. The letter was from my father. I stared at the handwriting for a long time before I could bring myself to read it. It was messy, slanted, not his usual penmanship. Like it had been written quickly, or under stress. Aaron, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I never found the courage to say these things while I was alive, and for that, I am sorry. Already I felt a tightness in my chest. I kept reading. I always knew there was a chance you weren't mine. Your mother never confirmed it, but I wasn't blind. You didn't look like me. You didn't act like me. And part of me hated that, not because of you, but because it reminded me of what she did. Of how easily trust can be broken. I paused, my throat dry. But here's the truth I never said out loud, I raised you anyway. I took you fishing. I showed you how to fix a leaky pipe. I watched you fall asleep on the couch with your head on my shoulder. I may have doubted the blood, but I never doubted the bond. Not at first. That last line burned. Not at first. Something changed in me over the years. I hardened. I wish I hadn't. I should have told you what I was feeling instead of punishing you with silence. But pride has a way of making cowards out of men. There was more, but my eyes drifted to the photo. It was of me and him, taken when I was maybe 9. We were standing in front of the garage, both of us covered in dirt, holding up a crooked birdhouse. He was smiling. A real smile. Then I looked at the DNA test. It confirmed what I feared. We weren't biologically related. But the letter didn't end in hate. It ended in guilt. And I realized, he did love me. He just didn't know how to carry the weight of betrayal without letting it break him too. I sat there for what felt like hours, the letter trembling in my hands. I read it over and over, hoping I missed something, some line that would soften the sting or undo the damage. But it was all there, plain as day. My father had lived with suspicion. And in the end, he let it win. He let it shape the way he saw me, the way he treated me, the way he chose to leave me behind. But he also admitted to loving me. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not consistently, but there had been love buried under all that silence. That mattered. It didn't fix everything, but it mattered. Ryan came back into the kitchen and stood across from me. He didn't say anything at first. Just watched me with that same unsure look he'd had since I arrived. I slid the letter across the table. He read it slowly. I could see the shift in his face as the words sunk in. Regret, surprise, and something else, maybe sadness, or maybe shame. When he finished, he looked up. I didn't know he ever wrote anything like this. I nodded. Neither did I. He sat down, tapping his fingers on the table. I remember that day, he said softly, pointing to the photo I'd pulled out. You two were out there for hours, building that stupid birdhouse. He said it was crooked because you couldn't hold a nail straight. I laughed once, dry and bitter. He always made jokes like that. He was rough, Ryan said. But I think he was trying, in his own way. He just never figured out how to forgive Mom. Or himself. That felt true. And maybe the saddest part was how unnecessary all the suffering had been. If he had just talked to me, just told me the truth, I might have understood. We could have had something honest, even if it was complicated. But instead, he left me guessing. And in the end, he let that silence take over everything. What are you going to do? Ryan asked. I shrugged. I don't know. I feel like I should be angry. But mostly I just feel tired. He nodded. You want to keep the letter? Yeah. I think I need to. Ryan stood and opened a drawer by the fridge. He pulled out a small box and set it in front of me. This was supposed to be for you. Dad kept saying he'd give it to you when the time was right. Then he never did. I found it last week. I opened the box. Inside was a watch, old, scratched, and familiar. I remembered it from when I was a kid. He used to wear it every day until one day he just stopped. I held it up. He actually wanted me to have this. Ryan nodded. He never said it outright, but he kept it separate from everything else. I think he always meant for it to go to you. I stared at the watch. It was nothing special. Not expensive. Not engraved. But it was his. And that made it feel heavier than gold. I slipped it on. It didn't quite fit, but I didn't care. For the first time in days, I felt something other than confusion. I felt seen. Maybe not entirely, maybe not when it mattered most. But enough. I looked at Ryan. Thank you. He gave a small smile. You're still my brother, Aaron. That hasn't changed. And in that moment, I believed him. The next few days moved slowly. I went back to my apartment, kept the letter and the watch on my nightstand, and avoided calls from extended family who only wanted to talk about the will. I didn't care about the money anymore. I didn't care about the house or the accounts. What I needed was time to figure out where I stood in the story of my own life. One night, I pulled out the letter again. I read the last paragraph slowly. I know this doesn't make up for the years I kept you at arm's length. I failed you, Aaron. I let suspicion guide my decisions. But I never stopped watching you grow into a man. I was proud of you. Even if I couldn't say it. Even if I didn't think I deserved to. I whispered the words to myself, then folded the page neatly and returned it to the envelope. It didn't erase the years of silence, but it softened the bitterness. He had known. Maybe not for sure, but enough to plant the seed of doubt. And instead of confronting it, he let it fester. I wondered if he was ashamed of how he handled it. Maybe that was why he wrote the letter. Maybe that was his version of an apology. I didn't know if it was enough, but it was all I was going to get. The next morning, I went to visit my mother's grave. It had been years. I wasn't even sure why I felt pulled there now, but something inside me said it was time. The cemetery was quiet, just a few birds chirping in the distance and the crunch of gravel under my shoes. Her headstone was simple. Just her name, the dates, and a line beneath that read, "Forever loved, never forgotten." I stood there in silence, unsure what to say. Then I knelt down and ran my fingers over the cold stone. "You made a mistake," I said softly. "And you didn't tell anyone. You let him live with it. You let me grow up with a father who couldn't decide if I was his son or not." The wind stirred the leaves around me. "But I know you loved me. I remember how you held me when I was sick. I remember your voice reading to me at night. I remember how safe I felt, even if I didn't understand what was happening around me." I paused, staring at the ground. He loved me too, I think. Or at least he tried to. He just didn't know how to carry it. I took the watch off and held it in my palm for a moment, then put it back on. Somehow it felt heavier now. "I forgive you. Both of you. I don't know what else to do but try to move forward." The wind blew a little stronger. I took that as a sign to leave. As I walked back to the car, I felt a strange mix of peace and pain. There were still so many questions I'd never get answers to. But there was also clarity now. I had the truth, even if it was ugly. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was chasing ghosts. I got in the car, rested my hand on the steering wheel, and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I still didn't know who my biological father was. But I knew who raised me. I knew who had shaped the man I became, for better or worse. And that had to count for something. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name written in careful, block letters. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and an old photograph. The paper was thin, yellowed around the edges. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the tone was oddly personal. It began simply. "I don't know if this will ever reach you, but I hope one day it does." I kept reading. "I was told to stay away. Your mother made it clear that the decision was hers, and I respected that, even when it hurt. I was young. Stupid. We never expected to fall in love the way we did, and we didn't handle it the right way. But I never stopped wondering about you. I heard you were named Aaron. I always liked that name." My stomach dropped. I stared at the page like it might vanish in my hands. "I never tried to disrupt your life. I knew your father was raising you, and I thought it was better that way. But not a day went by that I didn't think about reaching out. I kept a few photos from that time. This one was my favorite. It was taken the last time I saw your mother before everything changed." I looked at the photo. It was of my mother, sitting on a bench in the park, holding a toddler. I recognized the spot immediately, the same park I had sat at just days earlier. The boy in her lap was me. Same messy hair, same wide eyes. But what shook me was the man taking the photo. You could see his reflection in the window behind them. It wasn't my father. I sat down hard, the letter still clutched in my hand. There was no signature, just the initials TD, and suddenly it made sense. The friend Dad never mentioned by name. The man Hank said had died years ago. This was him. The other man. I didn't know what to feel. There was no anger, surprisingly. Just a strange calm. A missing piece of the puzzle had found its way into place. The next day, I drove to Ryan's house. I told him about the letter. I showed him the photo. He studied it in silence, then handed it back. "Do you want to find out more?" he asked. "I think I already have," I said. "I think I know enough." He nodded. "So what now?" I thought about that for a long moment. What now? I think I stopped chasing ghosts. I think I live my life. I move forward. Ryan looked relieved. "That sounds right." We didn't say much more after that. He offered me dinner. I stayed. It was the first time in years that we sat across from each other and felt like brothers again. That night, back at my apartment, I placed all the letters, my mother's, my father's, and the one from the stranger, into a small wooden box. I didn't lock it. I didn't hide it. I just set it on my shelf beside the photo of the birdhouse we built together, crooked nails and all. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand what happened between my parents. Or what might have happened if the truth had come out sooner. But I know this: I was raised by a man who doubted me, who punished me with distance, who left me with nothing but silence and a watch. And somehow, I still miss him. Love isn't always clean. It isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's hidden beneath hurt and fear and years of silence. But it was there. And now I can finally let it go.